Hello and welcome to our webinar for today. It's great to have everybody with us. The subject for our webinar today is to keep the momentum going after lessons, something that's really important and not always the easiest of things to do. So we're going to look at why it's important and lots of different tips and things for us to do this. So our agenda for today: why momentum is important, how we can keep it going, the importance of praise and motivation in ensuring momentum, and then at the end, of course, we will have our Q&A session as always. So please stay to the end. Please feel free to send questions or comments into the chat box. So my name is Tammy and I'm your host today, and we have Rose as always as our wonderful co-host, and we'll be sharing the hosting a bit more today. So let's get going. So what is momentum? Well, the definition of momentum is it's a quality that keeps an event developing or making progress after it has started. One way you can think about momentum, or for me, is if you're riding a bike, once you've started it, you keep pedaling to keep going. And that's what we want with our lessons. When we stop the lesson, it shouldn't mean that we stop teaching. What on earth do we mean? We'll discover this as we go. So think of momentum as the energy that's in and outside our classroom. So it's the development of the events in a learning situation that can lend strength and force to instruction. So why is keeping the momentum in our lessons so important? Why is it important to do it in class? But why is it also important to do it out of class? We don't want our students' bikes to stop moving as soon as they leave the class. So why is this so important? Well, we're going to look at 3 reasons why it's so important. And for the first one, we're going to go over to Rose. Oh, Rose, I can't hear you.
Oh, there we go. Sorry. Momentum is needed for student retention. So we need to look at why student retention is so important and why we need that momentum to give us student retention. So let's have a look at why. So generally, we want to have that momentum after lessons so that we can facilitate that learning and keep that learning going. And this will in turn then promote student retention, meaning those students will come back time after time. And this will ensure successful completion of the students' academic goals. Now, student retention is a great way to gain feedback on how well an institution or your lessons are ensuring that the student finishes the course or meets that academic completion. And that's key. That can be some great feedback in terms of, what you are doing in lessons are working. The techniques you are using are, meeting that student's needs. It's also a great source of feedback in terms of, is the student enjoying the lesson? And that is one way of keeping that momentum going, is to ensure that our students are really enjoying what they are learning, because nobody wants to go to a lesson that is very boring. I mean, I wouldn't want to go back. So at the end of the day, we are looking for that student retention and having those students returning to our lessons time after time. And how do we do this? By creating momentum, once the lesson has finished.
Fantastic, great. So point number 2, why is momentum important? Because it's needed for progress. So just imagine when you go to a lesson, if that's the only time you ever learned in that lesson, and as soon as you left, there was nothing else to keep you learning, to keep you thinking, how much progress would you really make? You would make progress, but it would take a much longer time than if the momentum was there between lessons. So why is this important? Because it assists in helping our students to meet their goals. So any responsible teacher understands the importance of setting achievable goals for each student according to their needs. By having momentum in and outside of our lesson, we help them to meet those needs. It helps them with progress in finishing courses. I'm sure many of us have started things and we've not finished them because we've lost interest, because there hasn't been that momentum behind it. Me personally, I sometimes need encouragement to keep going with something, because if I find it difficult, I'm quite happy to give up. I'm a bit of a perfectionist if I can't do it right. So if we're helping our students have that momentum, then we're helping them to finish a course. And just think how that will make them feel, how much that will boost their self-confidence, and also how good that will make us feel that we've helped someone to do that. That's all obviously linked in with progression in their studies. So you may work with a student, whether this is in a real life classroom or online, and you may work with the same student for a number of years. I know Rose has had the privilege of doing that. And by keeping that going, that momentum, that learning, we are helping them to progress in their studies. And it's a wonderful thing to watch your student, no matter what their age, to progress and to achieve their potential. It helps them to, it helps to encourage progression as a student in general. So by making specific goals, specific targets, we treat each student as an individual, but it also helps them in their general application and understanding of things. And as we just said, it motivates and boosts that self-confidence. How good do you feel when you have achieved something, when you have finished something that you thought was impossible? Well, imagine the magical feeling you can have as a teacher by doing that for your students, by keeping this momentum and helping them to progress. So back to you, Rose.
So our next point we will look at is momentum is needed for customer service. Now, this can be a very weird thing to think about as a teacher. You wouldn't think about it as I'm in customer service, but you are, especially in online lessons, because we need to remember that it's a choice. They don't have to come to these lessons. It's purely their choice to do so. And we need to be professional, and we need to make sure that our customer service, because at the end of the day, we are, supplying a service to them, is the best it can be. Mm-hmm. So let's have a look at why customer service is so important in the teaching world. So it provides a better experience for students. I mean, if you are professional and you are prepared for your lesson and there's a mutual respect in the lesson, it's going to provide a great experience for that student, and they're going to want to come back. At the end of the day, it's going to also help with that student retention. And then students are happier and more productive. I think we've all had a student that has been difficult and very unhappy in the lesson, and it makes it so hard to encourage them to be productive in the lesson. So if we provide, that great learning experience for them, they are going to be a lot happier. And at the end of the day, again, they're going to want to come back to your lesson. So there needs to be respect towards the students and the parents. This ensures ongoing momentum, because if there is respect, the parents will encourage the learning at home. The students will want to learn at home after the lessons. They will want to, show you what they've been practicing in their next lesson. So this is a vital point, is there needs to be a mutual respect. And then professionalism encourages student retention, as we've just mentioned.
Fantastic. So all those points are extremely important, and as to why we have to keep this momentum going. As a teacher, we have an awful lot to remember. So if you are someone who is just starting out as an online teacher or as a teacher in any course, take your time, learn this from experience, and it's okay, but keep that momentum going and ask other teachers, other people that you are doing, how they do that. Share your ideas and you can build your experience. It takes time. So can anybody think of any more reasons why continuous momentum is so important? So please feel free to use the chat box if anybody would like to ask, contribute.
I just think a good point to be aware of here is, again, that we need to remember, especially in online learning, is that it's a choice. So we want to, you know, promote that learning and get them to come back lesson after lesson. So in that situation, momentum is so important outside of the classroom, so that we can get those students to come back and then in turn, you know, meet their learning needs and just provide a great learning experience for them. Yeah,
definitely. So another thing that I think is really important is that by keeping our momentum, we build anticipation for the next lesson. So, you know, like if you get to a good book and you have a cliffhanger of a chapter, you want to read the next chapter. Well, the author knows those skills. They've used those skills a little bit to make you want to read more. As a teacher, we want our students to come back wanting more. This is particularly important with online. It's a very different environment. If we don't keep that momentum going, it could be a little bit stale. So by being lively, by building that anticipation, we can really make our students think, I'm excited for my English lesson, or whatever lesson it is that you may be teaching. It's our responsibility. We can't make every single lesson all singing and dancing. Of course we can't. But even with older students, we can give them something to have a purpose for coming back for.
Yes, we had someone that says you can use fun homework to keep the momentum going. And that's a great point. That is exactly it.
Yes, and we are going to discuss that a little bit more later. That is fantastic. Really important. Who likes boring homework? Nobody, or I certainly don't. So Rose, what if we want to know some more?
So as always, for more webinars and content like this, you can find it on all our social media platforms. We post daily with helpful tips and content that you might feel is really helpful in your teaching. So please remember to go to our social media platforms and subscribe to our YouTube, and
remember to hit those like buttons. Okay, great. So let's move on. So how can we as teachers keep this momentum going? We've talked about it, we know why it's important, but now this is the tricky bit. How do we keep it going? So we're going to look at 3 ways to keep it going. So the first way, written feedback. So this could be something that we give, maybe if you're in a school, it could be something that you give every time you do some homework. It could be every half term when reports are given out, or it can be a yearly report. If you're online, depending on your company or your own personal policy, what you've decided to do, this could be something that you include after every single lesson. So what is effective feedback? Well, effective feedback will be feedback that helps the students to adapt their learning strategies. So we will talk about this in another webinar, actually, about how all students are different and how that everyone has different learning strategies. But by giving a feedback that's appropriate to our students, so not generalized, but individualized, we know how we can help them to adapt, how we can help them to get the best. We know the way they learn the best, so we should give feedback that helps them to be able to tap into that, sorry. It guides other teachers to adapt teaching to meet the students' needs. By sitting and writing feedback, we're thinking about our students. So just like we said, when the lesson stops, teaching doesn't stop. This is where we're keeping going and as our momentum personally. And we're thinking, okay, what worked well today? What will work well in feedback that will keep them learning, keep them remembering or thinking, even if it's with a very young student who was only just beginning, it will still help us think about what we can do to input that momentum. And it will guide our students to become independent and more self-reflective of their own work. Our goal as any teacher is actually to let our students fly. We want to hold on to them at the beginning because they don't know what they're doing, that they need our guidance. But really, the most excellent teachers I've ever worked with and ever seen are those who have really stepped back gradually, and their students have finally flown off and they're able to do it themselves. That means we've done our job well. It's not always easy. It can be quite emotional doing that. Okay, so here we have a poll. So why is feedback important in keeping the momentum going after lessons? So over to you, Rose.
Okay, so why is feedback so important in keeping that momentum going after lessons? So you can choose as many as you'd like. So the first option is it creates a connection between each lesson. It can improve confidence and enthusiasm for learning. It supports student retention, and it encourages students to use their strengths to work on their weaknesses.
I can see that people are answering, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
We love it when you do this. Brilliant. Okay, so if we share the results, we can see that actually everybody has chosen every single one of those. Now, is that correct, Rose?
Yes. So all these points are why feedback is so important. It does create a connection between lessons, like Tammy's just mentioned. It improves their confidence, especially getting some really good feedback, you know, that could do the world of difference. Maybe they were really struggling and they couldn't get it right, but you wrote some really positive points. And that is the key to that student retention and, you know, just promoting that ongoing learning. And then, of course, it supports student retention, and it encourages students to work on their weaknesses by using their strengths.
Yeah. So all of those are great, and they're all really, really positive points. Oh, sorry. So let's have a look at the points of why. So it creates a connection between each lesson, as we've just been talking about. So these are really points from the poll. Improves that confidence, retention, and it could enhance learning and improve assessment performance. So this is when, as a teacher, you've had a long day. Maybe you've taught a lot of different students, whether that's online or in a big class, and you're tired. And how much effort do you really want to put into your feedback? Because we're all human, but this is why it's so important to go that extra mile. I know from my own personal experience, when I've written feedback that probably could have had a bit more effort, and when I've written feedback that maybe takes me longer, but I know the impact, I can see that impact it's had on the student. So we may be tired, but grab a coffee and take the time, because it is worth it for our students. So it's important to remember that feedback should be specific. So often when we give feedback, we will set targets. We need to remember that these targets are SMART targets. What do we mean by SMART? It means specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. So they're specific to what we may have covered in the lesson, to a specific area that the student needs to work on. Or even if they've done really well at it, they could just use a bit more practice on. They need to be measurable. How long are we going to give them? How will they know they've achieved it? Oh, because they can pronounce it by the end of the week, because they can make up a sentence using a certain grammar. Attainable. So we wouldn't want to give them a target to learn maybe 10 words, when that could be quite overwhelming, or 50 words. So we think, okay, what's my student capable of? For example, learning a new set of words for vocabulary. Maybe 5 or 6 would be enough. And relevant. So again, link it to the lesson. Don't make it just general, but make it think, okay, what will we cover in the lesson? And this is sometimes difficult when your student has been amazing. This can be difficult, but they will never not benefit from extra practice, even in an area they've done well on. And to make it time-based. So whether that's something like every day you can do this, or before your next lesson, or over the coming week. This, by having SMART targets, they're specific and they give a reason. So the student knows when they're getting their feedback, which includes your praise, like you did brilliant at reading today, you did this really well, you understood this. By being specific, it has a meaning and it has a purpose, and that keeps that momentum going. It should be straightforward. We don't want to overcomplicate feedback. It should be something that they can read or their parents can read and they can understand it and benefit from it that way. Always be encouraging and motivating. We would never want to include in our reviews if someone has maybe not behaved very well. That's not the time for us to do that in written feedback. That would be a different conversation. So there is always something encouraging that we can find, and it should be helpful. So Rose, over to you.
So our second point is extra practice. Now, we all know that practice can be extremely boring, and it's not the thing you want to do once you've just had an online lesson or a whole day of school. So we need to make sure that our practice that we do set for our students are relevant, it's fun, it's engaging, and at the end of the day, it keeps that momentum going after the lesson. Yeah. So let's just have a look at why, or we will first look at this question. So why is practice necessary in keeping the momentum going after lessons? So please feel free to comment your answers or, you know, your thoughts on this question.
So I personally think it's important to keep your students interested, and you want them coming back for more. And particularly as an online teacher, you have to build regular students. If you are going to earn any money, if you're going to be able to do anything and do well. So if you have that momentum by keeping that interest, then they're going to come back, which is obviously beneficial for you, but it's also incredible to see them come back. And I love seeing, not just because it's think, oh, that's good for me, it's because they've wanted to come back and you've had an impact on their little lives.
Yeah, great. So let's just have a look at why that extra practice is so beneficial. So our first point is that it aids in long-term retention. Now, like we said, the practice needs to be engaging and fun. Nobody's going to want to go back to a lesson that's very boring, and then you have to practice the boring work at home. So try to make it as fun as you can. We had someone say earlier, you know, you can use fun homework to keep that momentum going. That is a great point. That is what we want to achieve at the end of the day. We want them to come back to be excited to show you what they've practiced. I think we've all had students like that, you know, you've given them a target and they've been so excited to show you. They've like held up their homework as you click the start button, and that's what we want to promote. That's what we want from our students, to be excited to come back to our lessons. Our next point is that it speeds up the learning process. So we all know the saying, practice makes perfect, and it's true. We've had students, I think we can all agree on that, we've had students that maybe, you know, struggled with their pronunciation. You've set them a SMART target. It was specific, it was attainable, they could achieve it. And in a few lessons down the line, they're able to say the word without needing any help. And that's what we want, is that kind of learning process to go on after we've ended our lesson. Definitely. And then, of course, it facilitates recall. So a point that I want to mention here is that, you know, our students that we teach online, we need to remember that they've had a long day of school. Our practice that we set for them needs to be specific to the lesson that has just finished. You know, it needs to be relevant to what they've just learned. So that's a good tip to remember when you are setting targets and you are giving extra practice. Maybe you are providing them with an extra resource or something like that. Just remember that it needs to be specific to that lesson, because that student has had a full day of learning already, and you can't provide a resource or extra practice that is not relevant to what they've just learned. It just won't make sense to them. So that's a good tip to remember when you are providing that extra practice after lessons.
Brilliant, thank you. All great tips. So teaching is less effective when practice is delayed after lessons. So the more immediate opportunity for practice and feedback that we have straight after lessons, then the more learning that will occur, and therefore we keep that momentum going, keep going to being on that bike. If you put the brakes on, then you stop. Okay, we can slow down, but we want that momentum to keep going because it helps that progression, that learning in between. So our third tip is additional resources. So thinking of things that we could use in and outside of the classroom that keep our students progress, keep that momentum moving forward all the time. So why? Because it could increase our students' achievement. We may know that our students, one of our students learns brilliantly from reading. They can read and they take it in and they get it and they understand it. But another student we have doesn't learn as well. They prefer watching something, and another of our students prefers doing something. So if we provide materials or adapt our materials, extra resources to fit their needs, then their achievement obviously is going to increase, which will mean that we're supporting our students' learning. We cannot emphasize enough that it is really important to remember that all students are individual and we need to treat them as such. It provides more practice, so that keeps that momentum going. By having that fun element, they'll want to do it. By making it not too much, not too complicated, it makes it achievable, makes it attainable, gives them the practice without being bored silly. And we want to encourage the learning process outside of the classroom.
So we had a question, which is a great question, especially in the online learning world. How do you encourage parents to help with that after lesson practice?
Okay, well, for me personally, as an online teacher, I very often will set targets. And then, for instance, if they are learning a new tense, maybe I've been doing a present perfect with a student recently. So one of my targets has been frequently make up 3 sentences using the present perfect, or 3 questions using the present perfect. And then ask your mum or dad these questions. And then in our next lesson, you can tell me what mum or dad said. So something like that, that automatically involves the parents, even if they haven't volunteered to be involved. It gives them that target. What about you, Rose? What do you do to encourage parents to do that?
So I think that's a great point, and I would probably do the same thing. I love to set targets where they need to give me feedback. So, you know, there can be pronunciation targets, they can be read the sentence targets, but I think it's a great target to set for, especially for online learning. So a previous target that I've set for one of my oldest students is that I asked her to watch the news. We were talking about crime and vocabulary around crime, and I asked her to watch the news and, you know, discuss and kind of explain it to her parents, what has happened. And then I asked her to come and tell me, you know, what she learned from the news and using that vocabulary. So I think just setting those targets that get those parents involved as well is a great, you know, great way to do it. You could do it with younger students as well. You know, say these words to your mum 5 times before bed. Simple targets like that. Definitely. Just get the parents involved in the actual SMART target, and it 9 times out of 10 it works. Yes, and you will often find with younger students, the parents are quite often there. So you can very often, if a parent is there, I will always say at the end of the lesson, thank you, mom, thank you, dad. And I'll very often put in a comment, thanks, mom, for your support, something like this. So then the parents are, that you're recognizing that they are important. Sometimes that support is amazing. And it's you're so grateful that they're there to help their little one understand and translate for you if it's an ESL lesson. And like Rose said, I've often asked my students to go and find mom, go and find something yellow in a target for a little one. They're learning colors. Find 3 yellow things
and go and show it to your mum and say, this is a yellow ball, or whatever it may be. It involves them. So including in your targets, always being positive can really involve them. Thank you for that question. That was a really great question. Okay, so now we're going to carry on with, we're going to look at why praise is important. So we've said in previous webinars that you can never overpraise, which is true when the praise is meaningful. But you can overpraise when it has no meaning and you're just constantly saying, well done, that's great, for every little thing. That is overpraise. But specific praise is always brilliant, and you can never do too much of that. So why is praise so important? Because it engages our students and it encourages participation. We all know how much we enjoy being asked questions if we know that even if we get it wrong, our teacher is not going to be upset with us, but they're going to praise us in some way. Thank you for trying, or you were nearly there, something like that. By doing that, we will help those who are less, who are a little bit shy, a little bit reluctant. Over time, it encourages them to join in, and it gives them such a joy as well to be able to see their little smile on their face. Gives us the joy as well. It makes our students' attitude toward learning improve. If we've all had probably or heard of teachers that never praise and only ever criticize, and unfortunately, how does that make us feel? Well, very negative, not just about the teacher, but about ourselves. So when we give praise that is meaningful, think about the effect that will have on us. Even as adults, we love praise. We love being told that you did really well with that. You know, I love to cook, and if my family said that was a really nice meal, you know, I'm 40 and that still makes me feel great. So imagine how the impact of a praise on a student will have. It will obviously boost and increase their self-confidence. And this is interesting. It aids student retention. Why? Because they're engaged, because they're interested, because they think or know they're doing well. And even if they're struggling, their teacher is still with them. They're still on their side. So they'll remember that lesson, which is very important, especially for our students who maybe have difficulties that they're trying to overcome. And obviously, of course, all of that, this is all massively to do with the momentum. It increases that student motivation. Yeah. So, as we said, praise and motivation needs to be specific and meaningful. You can have somebody in front of you, and if you're constantly just saying, as we said, well done, that's great, but there's no reason for that, it just becomes meaningless and it doesn't motivate at all. But if you say, for example, you read that brilliantly, or you listened really well today, oh, I can't believe that was a great question that you asked me. Your homework is amazing. So this is important as well when you set targets and your student comes to lesson, they're excited to show you their homework. Take the time, take the time to acknowledge it, really praise, especially young ones, but even teenagers who, for them, praise isn't maybe very cool. But actually by showing that interest, saying, oh, I really like that part of your homework, thank you so much for taking the time to do that, then there's a reason why they're being praised, and it means something and it's genuine. That then they know this is sincere, my teacher really means this, what else can I do to get praised? Make it personal, make it effort-based, or you can make it behavior specific. So this works very well with children or students who maybe their behavior is not what we would expect it to be, or maybe it's very difficult. So this is something I've experienced myself in real life classrooms, much more than in the online world personally. But actually, if a child is misbehaving, whenever you praise all the good behavior they do, over time, that can have a big impact and it can change their behavior. Again, make it sure it's appropriate. And it's effective for keeping that momentum after lessons. If you put it into your feedback, and if you acknowledge them, so when they come back and they've done something in their targets, recognize it, reward it, make the feedback meaningful between the lessons. But this is the end of our webinar, so we're open to any questions that anybody may have, or any ideas or things that you have used that you feel have been effective in momentum in your lessons, either during or after.
I don't think we have any questions.
No, that's
so we
really
must
good.
have answered all of them.
We must have answered them all. Oh, I think somebody just. Oh no, okay, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're really grateful for you coming to our webinar today. Remember that if you are watching later, please leave comments in the comments section, and if you have any questions, please let us know, and we'll do our best to answer those. We certainly don't know everything. We are all learning together, but that's the beauty of teaching. We can share all the time. So we'll leave with this quote, that one way to keep momentum going is to have constantly greater goals. So remember, when the lesson ends, the teaching doesn't stop. That's our responsibility. So it would be great if you come to more of our webinars. We have a webinar like this every Wednesday. They're also available on YouTube. We're live on different different streaming services. We have lots and lots of other different videos and blogs going out every day with so much helpful information. So please click subscribe, please hit those like buttons, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you, Rose, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.